Welcome everybody to the Unraveler Show. I am super excited tonight with my guest Jason Foux, which I just learned how to pronounce that. I'm very excited. So right before the show, just kind of a background stuff going on here. Jason looked like he was in one of those old Chinese martial arts movies where he would talk and then like the sound would come through like 30 seconds later. It was really a lot of fun trying to communicate. So he literally went out while I started the show, restarted his computer, came back in, and we are about to discover whether or not this fixed the problem or if we are going to have a Chinese martial arts movie throughout the rest of the night. So Jason, welcome to the show. Let's see how this worked out.
Okay, is my lips and words matching up?
Yes, we did it.
Okay, awesome, awesome.
That is
Uh,
great. Wow, talk about the nick of time, man. I feel like I'm in a martial arts movie. Like that was dope. We're going to deal with
yeah,
some mythology tonight. So, I mean, like, there's no better way to start off a show.
right, right.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So,
yeah,
Jason, right before the show, we were talking about how to pronounce your last name. And so
right.
I thought it might have been Foe at one point, and then looked it up and thought it was Fox, and it turned out it was Folks. And you have a little bit of history behind this name because I said, "Oh man, I thought it was French," and you said it kind of is French, but there's more to it. So I want everybody else
Yeah,
to hear the story because this is great.
yeah. So I am Cajun. I grew up in South Louisiana, but my last name is actually German. My grandparents on my father's side, they came from Germany, and or well, a few generations before then. But it was with my either grandfather or great grandfather who changed the spelling of our last name. Most of the people on that side of the family changed their last name to Fox. But for some reason, we just added an O to it, but kept all the rest of the letters the same. So it became Folks. Originally, it was spelled Fux, and it was pronounced phonetically. So our last name used to be Fox. Um, which it was always great to tease my grandmother about that. It's like, Mama, how'd you pronounce this name? And she's like, oh, don't say that. So yeah, I actually got to see like my great grandfather Eugene's birth certificate, which was just a handwritten corner. It was like a corner of a newspaper, and the doctor just like wrote the information down in a pencil. Like the date and time he was born, the doctor's name, and the little baby's name, and that was his birth certificate, and it said Eugene Fox. Um, yeah, yeah. I used to have a real clear photo of that birth certificate on my computer, but that was like 3 or 4 computers ago. So, unfortunately, I don't think I have that anymore. But yeah, so that's the history behind my name. And I was thinking about legally changing it back to the original spelling. And my girlfriend keeps threatening to slap me if I do that. I'm not sure if she's serious or not. Probably
Okay,
she
good. Good.
is.
I thought it was just because we're
So
just like a couple of childish kids, but then apparently even
yeah,
your girlfriend thinks that would be so.
yeah, yeah. I mean, she knows that I'm a childish kid.
Yeah, right.
Um, but I think that's just part of the charm, or
That's
that's what
hilarious,
I tell myself.
dude.
Uh,
This reminds me of a story. When I was my ex wife. She had a grandfather who was. Do you come out of Christianity, Jason?
yes.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But you probably know very much about the legalistic side of Christianity. Like no matter what you do, like everything's just sin. You playing cards or sin, going to movies is
Oh
sin.
yeah, yeah,
If you wake up beyond six, it's sin. Like everything's a freaking sin. Whatever.
yeah. If you
Um,
enjoy yourself, you're doing something wrong.
yeah,
Obviously.
exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So she had a grandfather, and he was very much like that. Like everything was wrong, and like to a degree, like when we took a trip to California to visit her sister at the time with the whole family, the grandparents and everything. And while we were there, we took a trip to Hollywood
Mhm.
and took a trip around, whatever, did the sightseeing. And he was so uncomfortable the whole time. Like it was just this awkward moment. He's passed away now, but it was this awkward thing. Like it was just the whole time. And because that's the city of sin, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And as we're leaving Hollywood, driving away, he 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 looks back at the sign because we see the Hollywood sign,
yeah.
and he says, "What their sign said Hollywood." So that's
Hollywood. Okay.
yeah, Hollywood, right? So that's the kind of person like to that degree, just that's insane stuff. So anyway, we're driving home from that trip, right? And as we're driving, I don't know what got into me. I don't typically do this, but here I am. I guess I'm just bored. I don't know. Everybody else is in the car. We have like 10 of us in this big van, big large van. Um, and I'm just reading signs. Maybe I'm thinking I'm funny. I don't know. I'm just reading random signs, whatever, just reading out loud. Um, you know, Morgan and Morgan, and shop here now and 10 miles ahead or whatever, just reading signs.
Yeah.
I look off in the distance and there's this Chinese restaurant and it's spelled Fuk, and I think it was the letter U or something like that, or YU or something like that, because it was Chinese. And as I'm just randomly reading, I'm like, "Fuck you!" And I didn't even realize I said it, man. I just like it came out. I was like, no, look, it's what it says. Look, it's the Chinese.
It's not me. It's the sign.
It's the sign. I swear, it's the sign.
The sign did it. Don't blame me.
Dude, that was such an awkward moment, man. Anyway, so that's what. Yeah, anyway, this whole moment reminded me of that. Just so yeah, it's the whole. We're kids, man. What can I say? The fuck you,
Yeah,
fuck
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
So let's talk mythology because that's way more fun than. Well, I mean, I don't know. The word "fuck's" kind of fun.
Yeah, right.
But let's talk mythology because that's why you're here. So Jason has a show called Dragons in Genesis, and once a month you drop an episode,
Yes.
dealing with comparative mythology and showing mostly where the biblical narrative comes from.
Right.
So this is really cool what you do, and you just take it like almost like chapter by chapter, almost like a pastor exegeting through a book of the Bible. It's really wild.
Right.
So you've done a lot of these episodes, and they're really cool. Tonight, what I want to do is just kind of give a peripheral, an overview, so our audience can see what you do and what kind of stuff you do with comparative mythology. And so, we both are former Christians. So what I want you to do, and this is also for my own entertainment, is kind of start with Genesis 1 and just a very cursory view of the Old Testament text, taking us to Jesus, showing us what are the comparative mythologies that take all the main stories that travel through the Old Testament and get us to Jesus, because that's just a wild idea. And then maybe you might have even some thoughts on how the New Testament mines all of that and brings about this mythological character named Jesus
Right.
that saves the day, so to speak. So that'll be a lot of fun, and I want to just give you the floor for that. But before we do, tell me a little bit about how you came out of Christianity. Is this the journey you took through mythology? Is that how you did that?
Sort of. So what had happened was I was in my late teens, I guess. So I grew up Catholic because if you're in South Louisiana, you're probably Catholic. And, I was very devout. I was going to retreats. I was going to church, at least twice a week. I was co-founder of our youth group. I was in training to become a catechism instructor. There's this book called The New Catholic Catechism, and it's essentially an overview of Catholic theology. Because what a lot of people don't know about Catholicism is that a great deal of it does not come out of the Bible, but out of later Christian theologians, like Justin Martyr and people like that. And so they mine all these different early Christian theologians, and that's where a lot of their theology comes from. And so there's this compendium of just all the different teachings of the Catholic Church. So you have a question about a topic, just flip through and you'll find it. The official church stance on whatever. And so I had read this entire thing, and at some point I had questions because there were some things that didn't quite add up. So I started reading the Bible. I just picked up the Bible. I opened up to Genesis 1, and I started reading. And very quickly, I realized that there were problems in there. Like you get the creation story, and then in the next chapter, you've got to start over with a completely different creation story. And then, like when you get to Noah, there's all these details that are repeating. Like they're doing all of these things, but then it's almost like the story kind of goes back to retell a scene that it just covered. How many days were they in the ark? How long did the flood last? How many animals did they take on? Was it two of every kind? Or was it two of some and 14 of others? Well, it just depends on which sentence you read. And while looking at the footnotes, I saw that it talks about the Yahweh source and the priestly source, and how these are two different flood stories. And it gave like which verses were part of which source. So I just highlighted them, and then I went back and I read the Noah story. And I read all of one source, all the things I had highlighted of, I guess the Yahweh source. And I was like, this is an entire flood story. And then I read all the parts that I didn't highlight to get all of like the priestly source, and realized this is a whole other story and they don't match up. These are two completely different flood stories. And then I needed to know why. And so I went to my priest and I started asking about this, and it was pretty clear he wasn't comfortable talking about these things. So I had a friend at the time who was in seminary, and I started asking him about different study materials. And I got on eBay and I was able to find some of these books that he was using in seminary. And I ordered them, which these books are expensive. So, it took a while to save up enough money to get all the books that I needed. And I started reading these books, and I'm reading about how like the Torah is comprised of at least 4 different sources, and these things were compiled over centuries and redacted multiple times by all these different people. And I realized they're teaching this stuff to your priests and your deacons, your everybody, if you're in the know, if you're studying this. But if you're not, if you're just a layperson, you're getting an entirely different instruction. You're being told something entirely different. And that just wasn't satisfactory. I have to know things. If there's a question, I need to find the answer. So I'm reading the Bible while reading these different other books, while also reading these commentaries I bought. And I'm trying to understand why there are all these problems with it, all these contradictions, everything else. And while I'm doing this, I'm getting more questions. And so I'm buying more books. And by the time I finished the Old Testament, I realized that I was just reading a very dry Hebrew mythology, and that I no longer believed in a deity.
So just pause,
Yeah.
just to make sure I'm tracking and that all of us are tracking. I believe you said these are the books he was reading in seminary.
Yes.
Wow. So these same books that they're using to indoctrinate them, you're using and actually dedoctrinating, so to speak.
Yes.
Wow. That's
It'd be many
fascinating.
years later before I found out that that seminary, that there was this one professor I had spoken with. I had some questions about some different biblical topics, and I started sending him questions. And at some point, we're talking on a little video call, and we got into the topic of seminary and things like that. And he was telling me that the particular school that he went to, the university he attended, I forgot how many people were in his theology class, how many like theology majors he graduated with, but he said that the vast majority were there to become ministers, and half of them were non-believers by the time they graduated, because studying the material, I mean, there are only so many times you can see things like contradictions and where it borrows from older myth before you realize that what you're reading is just probably not accurate. It's probably not true. And when you look at something like the story of Noah, and you realize, oh, they took this story, they lifted it right out of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Well, you don't believe that the Epic of Gilgamesh is real. You don't believe this happened.
Right.
And the story of Utnapishtim and how he built this boat and he saved his family and a bunch of animals on it. You don't believe that ever happened. But that's where the story of Noah came from. So, well, that means that didn't happen. And when you start looking at all of these other stories, and you realize that the story of David and Goliath is a scene that was lifted right out of the Iliad, and there's like details, there's like fingerprints of that story in there. There are discrepancies caused by the authors misunderstanding a passage in the Iliad when they're describing Goliath's spear. And that shows, oh yeah, it doesn't just look like this scene. Here's the evidence of it. And say, okay, so this whole scene that looks just like something from the Iliad, it has discrepancies caused by this translational issue. And you go through one story after another, after another, after another. And you realize every time I get to a book, I'm finding that they're borrowing from older stories. And it never stops. Like, you start in Genesis, you end in Revelation, and at every point along the way, you're finding that it is reliant on older literature. And often this is literature from other religions. There's Greek mythology, there's Egyptian mythology, there's Babylonian mythology, there's Persian mythology. There's all these different myths that we don't accept. And this is the foundation of this book that you're supposed to build your faith around. And over time, that just became a problem. And I was like, the more I studied, the less I believed. The more I understood, the less it made sense as a literal account of pretty much anything. It makes more sense now. But you have to understand it for what it is. It's this complex construction of literature formed over many, many generations. And no single book of the Bible was written by one person. Every single book has other people's fingerprints on it. One person writes it, and then someone comes along and adds a verse or a word or a whole chapter or multiple chapters. And some books are just reworkings of others, like the books of Chronicles are just the books of Samuel and Kings retold from a Levitical perspective. And it contradicts it, on almost every detail. Because you're not supposed to have Samuel and Kings. You're only supposed to have Chronicles. It's supposed to replace it, the same way that Matthew was supposed to replace Mark. And Luke was supposed to replace Matthew, and John was supposed to replace all of them. You're only supposed to have one, not all. And so when you have these things, you realize it just doesn't make sense as a literal account of anything. And so, yeah, that's essentially what happened. The studying, the reading of it, the examining of this complex literature gradually just eroded the belief, because everything the belief was based on, I was finding out, was either contained too many errors or was based on older literature, or in most cases both. And so, yeah, but in the absence of this belief, there was this curiosity. I needed to know more. I needed to understand it. So I figured, okay, I'll buy a couple of more books and I'll read it and I'll understand it. And then I'll be done. Yeah, that was like 20 years ago. My pile of books keeps getting bigger. I have a bookshelf full of books. I have a Kindle full of more books. And I have even more books that are always coming in because I have amazing listeners and they just send me books. And I think the amount of books I still have to read that I currently possess is as many as I've already read in the last like 25 years of researching this. Um, and I'm hoping that maybe once I finish reading those, I'll be done. But I know that's not the case. Um,
Right. Well, I
so
mean, clearly you have a very, very big interest. So, the first thing I want to say is you have a great listening base. But tonight's real special because a lot of them don't ever get to see you. Because,
right,
right. So,
yeah,
this is really cool. I mean, maybe even some of them are like, oh, that's what he looks like.
right. Yeah, yeah. I tell people I have a face for radio and a voice for silent films. But no, my show.
Also Chinese movies. Just saying.
Yeah, yeah. That's why you don't put the two together. Um, but no, so I have Dragons of Genesis is an audio format podcast. It was released long, long, long before I ever had a YouTube channel. Um, the YouTube channel was the result of peer pressure. I blame Chris Mallard for that. It's all his fault. I'm going to send him a bill for this equipment one day. Um, but no, what happened was at some point somewhere along the way, about 10 or 11 years ago, I had all this knowledge rolling around in my head about this topic I had been studying for over a decade at that point, and I was like, I gotta tell it to somebody. And I joked that my girlfriend was tired of hearing about it at that point. So it was either she would break up with me or I start a podcast. So I start the podcast and I get all the information out on there, and my girlfriend gets to keep her sanity. Um,
I think
and so I just
that's a fair
started
trade.
compiling all the information and throwing it out there. And somewhere along the way, um, I learned how to actually do a podcast. And so then recently, after recording 99 episodes, I went back to the beginning and deleted all of the Genesis episodes. And I started redoing them a few months ago. And every month, a new Genesis episode drops to replace the first 14 that I did. Better research, better material, better writing, better audio for certain. Um, more in depth, longer episodes, each about 30 to 45 minutes or so. Um, and so, yeah, and essentially the goal of this decade long project that has only just now completed the Old Testament is to create the largest, most comprehensive audio format Bible commentary that is available for free anywhere in the world. There are Bible commentaries, and to get a paperback, you're probably going to pay about 80 or 90 bucks for a good one. Maybe you can get one for about 60 or 70, depending. You can get it on Kindle for much cheaper. Um, but you're still going to have certain limitations, as a lot of these things are produced from usually like a Protestant perspective. And so if you're not a mainline Protestant, you're going to see conflicting theology in there. If you're a Catholic, it's really not going to want to work for you. And if you're a non-believer, there's a lot that's going to be missing from there. A lot of the mythology that inspired these tales is not going to be referenced at all. So for that, you have to go and find other sources, usually a whole other book for each book of the Bible. And my goal is to just take all of these different things and put them together so that you not only understand what the story actually says instead of what a pastor told you it said, um, but also where the story came from, what it meant to the people, what inspired it, and other pieces of literature from around the same time and region that resemble it, whether it was inspired by those stories or not. A lot of times there are similar stories that came out around the same time or shortly before or after. And so you can really see it in its literary context. And so that's the purpose of the show, not to be an atheist Bible study, but to just represent the stories as they are, to the best of my ability, for anyone who wants to learn this material.
That's really
Uh,
cool, man. So, would you say, do you have photographic memory?
no, I do have a good memory for certain types of detail. Um, So for certain things, like some of these different Bible topics, I read it and like 5 or 10 years later, I still know what it said, and I mean, not verbatim, but if there's like some little detail that pops up, and someone's like, "Oh, hey, you said in this one episode that when Moses came down off Mount Sinai, he had horns, and everything said that that's like a medieval Christian, snafu. That was a problem with interpretation." And I can say, "Oh no, let me point you to this one particular lecture series available from the Great Courses by Professor Amy Jill Levine." And when she talks about the book of Exodus, she talks about how Jewish scribes mentioned that centuries before Christianity. And so a lot of these details, they just stick in my head forever. So
That's
especially
wild.
if I can attach it to a number,
Yeah.
because I can't forget numbers. Like locker combinations for
Really?
every locker I've
Dude, that's
ever had.
photographic, man. That's got to be
Yeah.
photographic, man. Come on.
Phone numbers for people that haven't had those phones for like 30 years.
Dang, dude,
Credit
that's
card
crazy.
numbers. I've
So,
got all my credit card numbers in my head from
so
like,
why do a show on mythology when you could do one on phone numbers or locker combinations? Like, and that's being silly, but genuinely, my question is, what motivates you and excites you so much about this particular subject, especially as an atheist? Because when I left Christianity, I was just like, I was a pastor, and literally my whole life revolved around the Bible. That's all I did. I, I could have told you anything about the Bible, man. When I left, I was just done. I couldn't.
mhm.
It was just, I spent so much time in it. I couldn't do it anymore. I was finished. So, what makes somebody who leaves Christianity interested in continuing to talk about the mythology of that book?
So you ever have something that just aggravates you? There's something that's out of place, and like you can't go and eat, you can't go to bed, you can't leave until you fix this one thing,
Oh, I know. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, like there's a knot in your shoelaces, and you just have to slip the shoe off, sit down, and work at that knot until you untangle it, and then you can put the shoe on, you can retie it, and you're all set. Okay, it bugs you. It's like an itch, and you have to scratch it. The Bible is like that. It's a puzzle that has to be solved. It's a knot. It's a gigantic tangle of headphone cables. It's all wadded up, and I have to untangle it.
Hmm.
And the fact that the deeper you go, the more complex it gets, means that the more you untangle it, the more of a knot there is remaining to untangle. It, it just, in all honesty, I'm not sure if this is a hobby or an obsession, or with my brain, is there much of a difference?
Well, I'm not. I mean, I get what you're saying,
So
because like
yeah.
I have this obsession to figure out how to unlock the brainwashing that Christians are
Mhm.
struggling with. Because for me, the way it unlocked was just one day I just woke up and I pair up in my book, How to Kill God the Easy Way, which I'm releasing a second edition with a different title called Unravelation this time to make it more palatable for Christians to read because they're obviously my target audience. Turns out they don't like the title How to Kill God the Easy Way. Who knew? But I would have. But that's just me. Anyway, point is, when I got out, I had this epiphany that the release from the brainwashing of Christianity was similar to the release of brainwashing that made me think I loved smoking at one point.
Mhm.
And I read a book called Alan Carr's Easy Way to Quit or Easy Way to Stop Smoking, and the way he unraveled the brainwashing for that was just mind blowing. Just instantly at the end of the book, it's like magic. You're just like, I don't want to smoke anymore, and you're literally done, and no more cravings. It's just done. So hey, if you're watching and you want to quit smoking, trust me, it'll free you. It's absolutely mind blowing. But anyway, so I got to thinking, and this was years later. I escaped Christianity and I became obsessed with trying to figure out why I was able to escape. I couldn't understand it. 40 years, bro. 40 years of my life I invested in this religion, planning a church at the end and just living for it with every bit of my mind. And then just one day, it was just like, I'm done. And why was that so easy? I couldn't figure it out. Then it hit me. The whole addiction parallel, addicted to Jesus, addicted to God. You see this in all the the propaganda that Christianity sells and stuff, and t-shirts and music and whatever. So I became obsessed with trying to figure out, which is where this book is coming from. And I'm still deeply embedded in this second edition with a whole lot of editors and trying to really research it and figure out what elements are going to really undo this brainwashing and free Christians so that any of us can hand this to a friend and say, hey, read this, and it will absolutely do the job. Like, that's my goal. So I get the obsession. Like, I think I'm obsessed with that. I really want to understand what made me tick and click and just free it. And that's what I'm working on right now. So I understand your obsession part. I do get what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm personally glad you're doing it, because I think a lot of people get freed in different ways. One of them is going to be by observing the mythology that you're demonstrating, and I think that's wonderful. So my question is, you got freed that way, and it all stuck with you. So are you now utilizing your knowledge to help others get free? Is that why you're doing it, or is it just a personal thing that you just got to let out, and then people just happen to pitch in and be able to watch?
Yeah, it's purely just a personal exercise. If I had an audience of zero, I would still be doing this. I would still be doing the research and putting in the time to make this. It, I'm glad that other people are finding it useful. I mean, I've got like a pastor in Tennessee who listens to my show religiously to help him write sermons, and he knows that I'm a non-believer. But he likes my show because it doesn't have any outside theology wrapped up in it. I'm not telling him this is what you need to believe. I'm saying this is what the story says, and this is where it came from. I'm glad that people are finding all these different uses for it, more uses than I ever thought imaginable. But that's not why I do it. I do it because the topic fascinates me, and there's still more to learn. And I just keep going back. I spend probably about 20 hours a week working on just reading, research, outlining, writing, recording, and editing in order to get this thing put out every month. I don't have to. I don't make a ton of money off of it. I don't even know if I break even. I don't bother looking at it. I don't care. It's just a fascination for me. It's it's like people who collect stamps, people who restore cars. It's a project. I'm making continuous progress on a long-term goal, and
It's a hobby. You love doing it.
That is the purpose.
That's great, man.
Doing it is the reason.
Yeah, that's why I do YouTubes. I have no, I don't make a cent. I mean, I would love to, but currently I don't make a cent off of any of the shows I do. I just love connecting with people. I think this is fun. I mean, after leaving Christianity, this is about the only connection you had to create a community at this point. And so that's what I do. And I absolutely love this. I love meeting people like you. I love dialoguing. I think this is great. So I love what you do, and I'm glad you do it. And let's continue to do this just for our own personal pleasure, because it's fun to have hobbies.
Yeah.
It's fun to connect. So yeah, that's great, man. So let's transition then, because I don't want to run out of time tonight. I want to give a chance for you to do what I asked, because I'm anxious personally to just hear how you will give this purview of the Old Testament leading up to Jesus.
Okay.
And giving the mythology behind it, and touch on the high points, because otherwise I'm sure you could be here for the next 16 hours. We don't have that much time, obviously. So
only 16?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I did that. So I said, let's try to keep it. Let's leave it to brevity, man. Let's keep it brief. But let's just say you were giving a 30-minute lecture at a school, and your job was to impress everybody with the knowledge of the Old Testament the background stories to the Old Testament and the mythologies, and that took us to Jesus. They gave such a strong overview, but only in 30 minutes kind of thing. Can you do that?
Okay. Yeah.
I would love to hear that, man.
I can certainly try.
Do it.
So the first thing to understand is that the Old Testament is very much not mythology. The purpose of the Old Testament for the vast majority of these writers was to write something that was not mythology. That's why it's so dry and boring and difficult to read, because they were trying to demythologize their whole background. The majority of the Old Testament was written after the Babylonian exile, 586 BCE. King Nebuchadnezzar, he strolls in, he destroys everything. Jerusalem is reduced to ruins. The temple's gone. The people are carted off, and they live as slaves in Babylon for several generations. Cyrus the Great comes in, he conquers. A bunch of people come back sometime later, and they take their Babylonian-influenced version of Judaism. They bring that to the land of Israel, and they change everything, including repressing the versions of Judaism that were still in the land. And so what we have today is essentially a mixture of Canaanite religion, Babylonian, and Zoroastrian. And of course, there's other little things peppered in there. And what they were trying to do was, in the face of the Assyrian conquest and the Babylonian conquest, they were trying to forge a new identity in the face of, repeated disasters that threatened to completely erase them from existence. And the way they did that was by deciding that they were special and that a particular deity that they followed essentially chose them to be a special group around which the entire world would be centered. And they had multiple versions of this story from multiple different deities. The primary two were El Elyon, who was the high god of the Canaanite pantheon. Think of him like Zeus. And the other was Yahweh, which was a Midianite god that gradually became worshipped in Israel. And these two groups, the Elohists and the Yahwists, they clashed constantly. And eventually the Yahwists kind of won out by absorbing the Elohists into them. And you end up with, Judaism, which is a form of Yahwism. And what you get in the early parts of the Bible, like in Genesis and Exodus, are stories about their origins. This is where we came from. And there's a bunch of them. Like the story of Abraham contains about 4 or 5 different versions of this covenant. That's because all these different groups were coming up with this story. And then Isaac has one. Each one has his own. Okay, Jacob has one. Moses was a completely different faction with his own, mythology about this is where the people came from. It's not meant to be read after Genesis. It's its own thing. And so essentially, these things all get cobbled together, and it becomes this fictive history for where they came from. And it starts off in Genesis 1, where they're like, we're going to create the universe. And this is a much later creation story. Genesis 2 is older. And it's based on the Enuma Elish, this Babylonian creation epic that they encountered while they were captives in Babylon, in which Marduk goes and he kills a dragon called Tiamat and uses her body to create the universe. And that's why it talks about the Tehom, the great dark ocean in the very beginning of time that covered the earth. And the god comes in and he divides the water in half. This is Marduk separating the body of Tiamat into 2 pieces. So dragon slaying is behind the story of Genesis 1, but it's been demythologized. They got rid of the dragons. The dragon is now just an ocean. Okay. And the
dragons in Genesis.
Yeah, it's right there. In the very beginning, there's a dragon right there at the very beginning, okay? You cannot get out of the first chapter without finding the dragons that are in Genesis. And then they come in, and the god doesn't like stab it with a spear and rip it out. No, it just speaks a word, and it occurs. Okay, they're demythologizing the thing, okay? Genesis 2 is a bit more mythological. God is more like Yahweh is more like the god Enki. He comes in. It's actually based on this story, this Sumerian story. And he's taking clay and he's molding it with his hands to create people, to serve as a slave race, to work in his garden, to grow all this food for all the different gods. read chapter 2, there's multiple gods in there, and this little person's running around working in his garden. But things don't go as planned, and you end up, the whole thing goes astray, and you kind of have to start over again. And so he throws him out of the garden, and this serpent god named Nehushtan, who we're going to meet again soon, they throw him out too. And that has nothing to do with the devil. It has nothing to do with snakes and gardens. It actually has to do with one group of priests in Jerusalem ousting another group of priests. And eventually, all this, they borrow some different myths from different groups like the Edomites. Adam and Edom is essentially the same word. It just means like the red earth. And Esau and Adam were probably originally the same mythological figure, and they were just used in two separate stories. And so you have your different families that are running around the early world, and eventually this leads to the flood, because along the way, some of the sons of El Elyon, they fly down and they land on a mountain. And we have an expanded version of this story, or a couple versions of it in the book of Enoch, where they fly down, they land on this mountain, and they look at all the women of earth, and they're like, man, these are some hotties. And next thing you know, you've got a bunch of half human, half gods running around the earth, tearing everything up. And they grow to be this enormous height. And depending on how you translate the thing, they may have been nearly a kilometer tall, or 20 feet. It's kind of hard to tell because copyist errors and things like that. But you had this race of giants, and they're running around, they're tearing all this stuff up. And Yahweh's like, you know what? We got to fix this. So if they want to transgress the natural order, if they want to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, this thing that we separated in Genesis 1, then we're gonna mix them together again, and we're gonna take the sky ocean that we put up above the firmament way back in the day, and we're gonna put it back down on earth. They want heaven and earth to be one. We'll do that. We'll put the sky ocean in heaven back down on earth, and bring it back to its pre-creation state, and kill everything. But we're gonna do this. But we're gonna save a guy, because that's what happened in these old stories recorded about Ziasudra and Atrahasis, and then Utnapishtim, and eventually Noah. And what it was, there was this city on the banks of the Euphrates River, a city called Shurapak. This would be in, I think, southeast Iraq. And about 4,000 years ago, it flooded, because that's what rivers do. And a bunch of people died. There was actually a series of floods. Lots of people died. And from this, there was this myth born about this flood, and about the survivors of it, led by this guy named Atrahasis. And then later that became this guy named Ziasudra. And as the story grew and spread and radiated outward, it picked up new details as people reimagined the story and used it for different purposes. And eventually it became a story about seeking eternal life. And this guy named Gilgamesh was talking to the lone survivor of this flood many, many, many generations later, after the world had been repopulated. And he talks to Utnapishtim, the guy who built the ark. And this story was captured in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was spread all over the ancient world, translated to multiple languages, and the Israelites, they read it and they loved it. And we've got copies from Israel of the Epic of Gilgamesh from like hundreds of years before Genesis was written. And so they took that story and they put it in there because everyone needs a good flood story. And then after that, they had sort of another version of the natural order is being transgressed and God has to destroy it, and that's the Tower of Babel story. It's kind of like a Flood 2.0. And it was sort of an ideological tale of how you get all the languages. And so they're gradually working up to kind of use the same thing of their old mythology, but to kind of lay the foundation of where they came from. And the whole point of this was to say, okay, if you go from the very first man all the way up, you'll eventually get this straight line to this man named Abraham. And he's us. This is where we came from. And it's this guy named Abraham who came from Babylon. Because remember, that there's these Babylonian exiles. They come from Babylon and they settle in Judah. And Abraham is about this exile who comes over and he settles. And he has all these different adventures. Okay. And it's a Babylonian name. It doesn't exist in Israel prior to the Babylonian exile. They didn't have anyone named Abraham. And he has all these.
Real quick, what about the name Abram? Because remember, originally it was Abraham before.
Yeah, it's variations on the same name.
Okay.
Abraham, that existed in Babylon, and the surrounding area. In Israel, Judah, they had some little outposts over in Egypt on this island called Elephantine. We've got a lot of records from there. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, these names, they just didn't have them. They didn't seem to exist. Every written record we have from prior to the Babylonian exile seems to be lacking a lot of the extremely prominent names, which is odd. If these were prominent figures, whether they existed or not, they would have prominent names. It's like how many girls were named Khaleesi after Game of Thrones came out? Like, it was a lot. If these names like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all that, if these were prominent figures in their history or fictive history, you would expect some of their people to have these names, but they kind of don't. Like these people, they don't really know anything about these people, about their stories, about this origin story. None of it. The vast majority of it seems to be a post-exilic creation, and the few stories they do have are these little like tribal stories that seem to have been repurposed and had some names changed to incorporate these later figures into them. And so, yeah, it basically all kind of leads up to this. And then they have this series of origin stories. This is where we came from. This guy named Abraham, he made this covenant with God. And then he made this new covenant with God. And then he had another covenant with God. And then he had another covenant with God, and one involves just destroying a bunch of idols. One involves cutting off his foreskin. One involves fighting these corrupt kings. Over and over and over, he keeps having, one involves being tested to kill his son. All these different stories. Just to say this is where we came from. And that's pretty much the whole of Genesis, because after that, it talks about Isaac and Jacob, and then it has this huge story that takes up almost half of Genesis, all about how everyone came from a guy named Joseph. And it's all about how that's the guy who had this whole thing. And when you're all done with that, and you're done with all your origin stories of where the people came from, then you get Exodus, which is just a whole nother thing of here's where the people came from. They came from Egypt, which it wasn't even originally a Jewish story. We have multiple Egyptian stories about how Egyptian princes went out to found all the nations of the world. Like they founded like Athens and Sparta and stuff like that. It was all these Egyptians that went out and did it. And one of them, this guy named Moses, he went east and he settled in Canaan, and he built the city of Jerusalem, and he instituted their laws, and he established this coalition of like these 12 people, these like 12 elders who would rule over everything, and each one had its own little group of people. And so we have stories like that from the Egyptians. And it looks like Exodus may have just been like a response to that. Oh, no, that wasn't an Egyptian guy. It was a Jew living in Egypt. I mean, you got the name right, and that was it. But it was really a Jewish name, even though Moses is Egyptian. And so they did this, and they they took all of there's actually multiple different stories of the Exodus all kind of rolled into one, and it just became another origin. This is where we came from. And right in the middle of it, in Exodus 15, is a whole nother thing where the storm god fights against the water dragon. Exodus 15, it's the song of the sea, and it's supposed to be about how Yahweh defeated the Egyptians, and it's like, and he went and he killed the ocean.
Get out. That's
It
wild.
it's the storm god. This is Baal and Rahab. This is Marduk and Tiamat. It's the storm god fights the water dragon.
Hmm.
And it's a creation by combat story is what it is. And then after that, they get to the whole scene where they're like, this is where our laws come from. And it's just an ideological tale for how they got their government, how they got their laws, how they got their temple. And in there is this interesting little piece where Moses goes up onto the mountain and the cloud of God descends on him and he goes away and he comes back 7 days later and he gives instructions on how to build the temple. And what's missing from there, but what you're supposed to understand is that he was taken up and he was brought to the beginning of time to witness the creation of the universe. And he saw the 6-day creation. And that's why he comes back after being taken up. And he comes back on the 7th day. He went to the beginning of time to see the 6-day creation. And that's what the temple is supposed to represent, the cosmos. And that's why he
Yeah,
comes back and gives the dimensions and layout of
that,
the temple.
that's super interesting because, like, so I don't know if you're familiar with the full preterism position. Um,
A little bit.
but I used to be a full preterist before I left
Oh, okay.
Christianity, and but not just full preterist, but the covenant creation variety. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the longer you dig into it, so the covenant creation perspective is that the Genesis account, the creation account, is actually a prophetic account of Christ coming as the second Adam,
Mm,
who becomes the second priest, Adam, the first priest. So the Genesis account is actually not a description of the material creation, but a description of the temple.
mm,
Um, and when you go to the description of the temple in Exodus and Leviticus and whatnot, you see a lot of the same elements, creation elements there describing it, especially a lot of the garden imagery.
mm.
So when you said that, it just triggered me. I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, dude, I know, I'm familiar with that. I know what you're talking about because I used to think that too, except as a Christian, I didn't root it in mythology. I just thought that was, a prophetic
Right.
account. But I don't mean to interrupt. I'll do this from time to time because like whatever you're saying is intriguing me. So
Yeah. It's
I'll
like,
jump in.
oh,
But
light bulb
yeah,
goes
yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah,
Um,
I totally see that. Go ahead.
yeah. And so then after this, they go and they're wandering around for a while. And if you actually omit 2 sentences um, from the books, then it seems like the journey from Egypt to Israel took 1 year. They start at the Passover and then they end at Passover because this is one scene in, I believe, Numbers where they get punished and they have to go wander around because they they showed fear when they shouldn't have. And then again, at the end of like Deuteronomy, when they're about to go and cross the Jordan, uh, there's like these 2 sentences there that say that they they were wandering for 40 years. If you take out those 2 sentences that actually read like later insertions, then it looks like they had the Passover, they went through, they had some adventures in the desert, and then they show up, do another miraculous river crossing, and have another celebrate the Passover. And so you have Passover, crossing the Red Sea, and then another Passover and crossing the Red Sea. So it was meant to be a 1 year thing. But then they added this 40-year thing into it that's only in, I think, like 2 different verses in 2 different books. Um, and then you find out, like, whenever you get into the promised land, the first thing the scouts do is they go visit a brothel. And they meet this young prostitute who says that she remembers the recent events, the miracles, all the great deeds that Yahweh did right next door in Egypt. How's she going to do that if, this was like a whole generation ago? Yeah, That's called editorial fatigue. They forgot to change that part. But along the way, in there, in the book of Numbers, Numbers is all about how the Levites can go suck rocks because they're stupid, and they're running around, they're doing all these things, and every time you turn around, the Levites they're screwing up somehow, and they screw up in some way, and Yahweh sends a bunch of fiery angel snakes that seem like they came straight out of the Power Rangers to go and kill all the Israelites. And they run around, they're spitting fire, they're flying, and they're biting people, and they're all dying because they've been, envenomated by all these, basically cobras. And the Israelites, they're like, I know what to do. And so they erect a bronze statue to the serpent god Nehushtan, whom we met in Genesis chapter 3. That's the snake god that guards the tree of life. They erect a statue to him, and they put it up on this pole, and they erect it in the middle of camp. And everyone who prays to this bronze idol is cured of the curse that Yahweh inflicted on them. Now, this is like really weird. Like, Yahweh's trying to kill them, but if they pray to a snake god, it overpowers the curse of Yahweh. And what this story is they're trying to put a Yahwistic pedigree on this snake god that they used to worship. And later, in I think one of the books of Kings, they're like, you know what? I think it's Hezekiah. He's like, we're going to take the snake god out of the temple, the snake god that Moses brought to us, and we're going to get rid of him. We don't want him anymore. And so they took all the different gods that were there, Asherah and Anat and Nehushtan, and all these different gods, and they threw out their idols and they destroyed them. But they had these other gods, and they did all these other different things. And they weren't like evil. They were just the gods of their pantheon. And then after that, they get into this weird part of their mythology where they're still trying to come up with who they were and recycle old stories, like the stories of Samson, who was a sun god named Shamash, Delilah, who was a moon goddess, and then all these different judges who were just little folk heroes. And they throw in all of these things, and they repurpose them to just be about why they need a king. Because they're trying to explain, why you would need a king, but at the same time, they don't really like kings because they're writing in the post-exilic period when they're not allowed to have a king. That they're ruled by a governor who's been appointed by the Persians. And the whole thing of these kings is like, look, you keep asking for a king, and Yahweh's going to give you a king, but he doesn't want to. He's going to give you one because you keep whining about it. And what do the kings do? They screw up worse than everyone before them combined. And everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until finally he's like, you know what? I'm going to reset it again. I'm going to destroy Jerusalem. And then you're not going to have any kings again. You're all gone. And so all the kings, their line eventually ends. The house of David is long gone. Everyone gets carted off, or not everyone, but a lot of people, they get carted off to Babylon. And then you have all these weird prophetic books about a time when things are going to get better and times when things are going to be worse. And most of it is like, this is why we deserve to be destroyed by the Babylonians. And that's essentially the point of the prophetic books, is to just say, look, obviously we deserved it because it happened. What did we do to deserve it? Because they were encountering a problem. They were on the path toward monotheism. And if you don't have other gods to blame for what happened, then you have to blame the only God you have. Or as it's put in Isaiah 45:7, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. And there's a problem that all monotheistic faiths struggle with. How do you reconcile evil? Well, you say we must have deserved it. Right. And so the prophetic works are them writing during and after the Babylonian exile. saying, "Oh, look, because you're doing these wicked things, I'm going to one day punish you for it." Um, and then they occasionally slip up and speak like in the past tense and reveal that, oh yeah, you're actually writing decades or centuries after it happened, um, as they do frequently in Daniel. And that's essentially where the Old Testament ends, is just looking back on the Babylonian exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, and how one day things are going to get better. They want them to be better. Um, but they got to suffer a little bit first because they did things wrong. And sort of the point, the theological message behind it is, we're instituting a new religion. And if you don't follow it, bad things are going to happen, as they recently did. Um, it's basically blaming dissenters for the recent calamity. And that's essentially the point of much of the prophetic works. Now, hidden underneath this, and going all the way back to Genesis 1, is the threat of global catastrophe, that one day the Tehom, which is the great primordial ocean, is going to swallow up the world again. And scattered throughout the Old Testament are these little tiny references here and there that the only thing keeping the world from being obliterated again is the Jerusalem temple. And you have to make these sacrifices, specifically the Day of Atonement sacrifice. You have to make that sacrifice on the right day of the year. You have to do it a specific way. And what you have to do is you have to take these two goats, and they're supposed to be identical. And one goat represents Yahweh. And you bring this goat into the temple, and you slice it up, and you scatter its blood all over the inside of the temple. If you read the descriptions of the altar, it has horns, it has meat hooks, it has flesh scrapers. It's like something out of Hellraiser. It's truly horrific. And the purpose of this, you rip this animal apart, and you throw its blood all over the place. And the blood was meant, because remember, the temple is the universe, okay? It had like the stars, and painted up on the vaulted ceiling, and had constellations and stuff.
The heavens, the earth, the sea, had all of that.
Yeah,
The garden.
it had this
lights,
big like reflecting pool outside to represent the ocean. Everything. Okay.
Yep.
So you throw this blood all over, and this is to represent the blood of their dead, dying, and rising God. And there's a handful of references to this idea in the Psalms, where it talks about how Yahweh, like, he comes back to life after his battle with the dragon. And so this goat that represents Yahweh, ripped apart, his blood scattered everywhere to purify the creation, that is the temple. Okay, and then what? You use this blood, because the priest is covered in blood now. He takes his bloody hand, and he then goes outside to the second goat. And he places his hand on the goat's head, and this, basically, it takes the blood of Yahweh, and it sucks up all the evil of creation, all the corruption that came from the wicked angels that descended in Genesis chapter 6 and corrupted the perfect creation. It gathers up all the sin, all the corruption, and it places it on this other goat. This is the scapegoat. This goat is then led outside of the city, and they go out to this pit in the desert, and they throw the goat in there, and it is given as a sacrifice to the only other God that you were allowed to give sacrifice to according to the Old Testament. And this was this evil entity named Azazel. And you took the scapegoat and you sacrificed him to Azazel, and that took all the evil and it threw it back down into the pit with the evil creature where it belonged. And the world was now restored to purity, and it was atoned. The whole sins of the world was now atoned, and the world could continue to exist for another year. And it was believed that Jerusalem, that the temple, was built on top of this massive stone that plugged the fountain down to the deep, where the Tehom comes from. Remember in Genesis 7, I believe, The fountains of the deep opened up and the water sprayed out and it flooded the world. Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, is this giant capstone that seals it up, and it keeps this subterranean ocean at bay. And as long as you do this sacrifice, it maintains the integrity of the seal, and the world continues to exist. But there was one problem. In the post-Babylonian world, they adopted the Babylonian calendar. See, before the exile, the Jews, they had an Egyptian solar calendar with 365 days. But in the post-Babylonian period, they used a lunar calendar that was 10 days short. Now, the first year you may be all right, but each year you're off by a week and a half, and it gets worse and worse. Eventually, you have to add a whole extra month every few years to get your calendar back in line. But what this means is whenever you're conducting these sacrifices, you're doing them on the wrong day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do this on the right day, the seal begins to crack and eventually the world will be destroyed. And there's little snippets of this in the Old Testament where they're concerned about this. They're worried about this. There's a verse in Isaiah that talks about how the Jews returning from Babylon, they're not even Jews. They're more Persian than Jew. And they've got all this Babylonian influence, and were they even people who came from Israel? And they actually accused them of not even being natives of the land, of being, who knows? Which, of course, some of them were, because you shuffled people around, in the ancient world. It was a tool of conquest. So they had this concern, this very real concern among sectarian Jews that the world was going to end because the temple was no longer performing the practices correctly. And the only way to fix it was to destroy the temple and redo it properly. Go back to what the temple was supposed to be, go back to the original calendar and do your sacrifices properly. And some Jews thought that a guy named Judas Maccabeus was fixing this. He drove out the Seleucids and he kind of did this whole purging of the temple, reinstituted the priesthood, reconsecrated the thing and all of that. But other Jews were like, no, he's still not getting it right. We need Judas Maccabeus to be reincarnated in the future, to come back and do it right, to completely tear the temple down. There's actually this section in First Enoch called Animal Apocalypse, which is a great name for a metal album, in which they talk about Judas Maccabeus like being reborn and completely destroying the temple and rebuilding it the right way. And of course, eventually the temple was destroyed. But it wasn't rebuilt. It was just demolished. It was gone.
Second time, yeah.
Yeah. Some of the Jews were okay with that because they had been living outside of the temple for so long. They were already democratizing their relationship with their deity. No longer did you go to the temple and commune with your deity through the priests. You did it in the privacy of your own homes. You did it within your community. And by the time the temple was destroyed, you already had thriving groups of sectarian Jews who'd been around for a couple of centuries who believed that the way to your deity was through treating your community well, through observing certain laws and certain rituals and all of this. And about 150 years before the time of Jesus, we have these writings from people who look very much like Christians, like the Essenes and the Ebionites, different groups like that. A lot of them living along the banks of the Dead Sea. This is essentially Christianity before Christianity, or maybe it was just Christianity, but it wasn't called that yet. And it's through this idea of atonement without a temple that really sets the stage for Christianity, because that's essentially what Christianity is. It's Jewish atonement in the absence of a Jewish temple where you perform your atonement sacrifice.
Well, fascinatingly, though, that's why I think the New Testament text mined that part of the Old Testament and pulled in the fact that it's a spiritual temple now, right? And so we still
Mm-hmm.
have the temple and we still have the atonement, but it's not a place you go to. It's something
Yeah,
you're part of,
it's
right?
inside you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Or you're a part of it or whatever, but
yeah.
it's
The
ethereal.
temple is
It's
made up
not.
of the
Yeah,
community. It's not
yeah,
a
right,
physical building,
right,
you
exactly.
know.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
you know,
it's a
and
cool
they,
story. I mean, it works. I mean, like the New Testament writers, I gotta say, man, the Gospel writers, brilliant,
oh
like
yeah,
brilliant. The way they mined all of that and pulled it together with the hero of Jesus at the end, I'm just like, that's some brilliant stuff, and I can see why it's so easy to fall into the trap. It just the story works. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? I mean, until you realize that there's no actual benefits whatsoever, it's just all spiritualized and there's
yeah,
nothing tangible about it. But still, like the story itself is really cool, and I can see
yeah,
why you love it because it's like a really cool story for sure.
absolutely. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the reason the Old Testament was written and the reason the New Testament was written is the same reason. Your temple was destroyed. Your people were scattered. A lot of them were hunted down and killed.
Yeah,
You were dispersed and you were threatened with annihilation. Your identity almost ceased to exist. And now you're trying to find a way to come together again. All these disparate groups who, many of them do not agree on much of anything, or the few things they disagree on so vehemently that they almost hate each other. I
yeah,
mean, like the book of Acts portrays Paul and Peter as like best friends, but when you read the letters of Paul, they hated each other. You know, they were at each
they were at
other's
odds for
throats
sure.
constantly. Paul is like, oh yeah, he's a Satan. You know, and it's like, are you kidding me? And they were just arguing about food and foreskin. That's the thing they argue about. Do you have to be a practicing Jew in order to become a Christian? And Peter's like, absolutely. If you do not perform circumcision and you do not maintain a kosher diet, you can't become a Christian. And Paul's like, you're good. Just eat what you want to eat. Keep your body intact. You're fine. Just be a good Christian. And and they're at each other's throats constantly. Um, but Acts is like, no, no, no. They put all that aside and they all came together. They're trying to form a new cultural identity in the wake of near total annihilation. And that's why they call Rome Babylon in Revelation. They're talking about the same thing. They're talking about the outside enemy that came in and annihilated everything and destroyed the temple again. Um, it's the same setup. It's the same, um, you know, cultural influence. It's how do you forge an identity when your identity was almost lost? And that's why these stories were written. And they have a few differences, you know, some different sources they're drawing upon. Like you find more of the works of Homer in the New Testament than in the Old Testament. A lot of the stories about Jesus, like Mark loved the works of Homer. Uh, Jesus is doing all this Homeric shit in there. Like a lot of the adventures of Jesus came straight out of the Odyssey. That's why they're sailing around so much. Look at a map of the place. It's a landlocked region. They have one small lake called Lake Kinnereth or Lake Gennesaret, you know, depending on how you want to translate it. And it's this tiny little thing. You can paddle across it in a small boat in like an hour and a half. But in the
Yeah,
story, it's this great inland sea called the Sea of Galilee, which did not exist at the time. It was like 300 years before it got renamed or something. Um, and so, and it takes like 10 hours to get across it, and it's racked with storms, and there's massive shipwrecks and everything else. There's, you know, huge squalls, and, you know, that doesn't exist. You know, and
Yeah.
this was actually pointed out. I think Porphyry of Tyre actually He's like, what's this Sea of Galilee? There's no such place. You know, sometime later they took the only thing they had, this little freshwater lake, and they're like, I guess we can just rename this Sea of Galilee so that the Gospels don't look kind of dumb. But that wasn't the point. The point, as Origen points out, was that you're not supposed to read this as history. You weren't supposed to read this as literally true. If you did that, you missed the point. You were supposed to take a message from these stories. It was allegorical. Mark was never meant to be a story about a Jewish carpenter changing people's lives. It was a way for people to understand a very complex theology, and to present it in a way that you could take the first steps into learning about this mystery faith, which is how it started out. And then eventually that all became lost. They lost the details of what was behind the gospel, and eventually just thought that the gospel was the point, and the real story, the truth behind it, just kind of fell away. And everyone is now doing like the apostles and the disciples in Mark's gospel, where they think they understand, and Jesus is like, no, you still don't understand what I'm saying, because you're thinking it's supposed to be literally true.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, and you're right. The gospel, especially, Mark, is brilliant. It's amazing literature. It's extremely complex.
Yeah.
The way it's formulated, it starts off, it's like, as it says in Isaiah, and he has this quote that you can't find in Isaiah, and that's because it's from like Malachi 3:1 and I think Isaiah 40 verse 3 or something like that. And what Mark did was he's taking two different verses from two completely different books and merging them together to make a sentence that's better than either of them.
Well, sure. I mean, because
that's
like
what he
that was
needs
the
it to
whole
say.
that was their whole goal, was to make it appear as though the whole story was true and the ending was here. Like that's like it's still building upon the same thing, trying to find identity and trying to build your identity in this story and saying, hey, look, we are real. This is real. Like, we can actually finish this story perfectly. And they did, for all intents and purposes. Especially if you, in my opinion, take the whole full preterist approach, where you see the whole thing fulfilled with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and bada bing, bada boom, the whole thing's done. It's a cool story, but yeah, I mean, the whole thing is still, regardless, rooted in mythology, but nonetheless cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's very complex literature. It builds on a whole variety of mythological sources, and
sure.
it does so quite like the way, especially like I really love Mark. Mark has to be probably my favorite New Testament book. The way he takes all of these different sources and weaves them together to tell a new story. Mark was not like whoever he was, because it wasn't Mark.
Right.
Originally it was called the Gospel of Jesus Christ. It didn't have a name attached to it other than that. So,
Right.
We don't know who this person was, but whoever he was very well read, very well educated, and I'm convinced used more sheets of paper outlining his gospel than actually writing it. There's no way he didn't. There's this thing, they call it a Markan sandwich. It's when he starts talking about something and then he goes off to a different topic and then gradually comes back to the first topic, and it makes this neat little literary symmetry where like the beginning and the end match, and then the next thing and the thing just before the end match, and then the thing after that and just before that, they match.
So chiastic structure is what you're saying.
Yes. And so Matthew does this with the whole plot, like the very beginning and the very end of Matthew match, and then like the next scene and the scene just before. But what Mark does is he has scenes in which this happens. So a great example would be the fig tree and the purging of the temple. So he comes in, he sees this fig tree. It's springtime, so it doesn't have any figs. So he gets mad and he curses it. And then he goes in. He has his whole run in with the temple. He flips over tables and everything else. And then they leave the following morning and they see the fig tree and it's withered and it'll never give fruit again. Well, why would you curse a fig tree? They don't produce, like, you're like 4 or 5 months early to get figs. What's the point?
Yeah.
The fig tree represents the temple. It's supposed to be giving fruit and it no longer does.
Yeah.
It's not nourishing the soul, okay? It's not doing its part. And now it never will again because it's been destroyed.
Right.
Okay? And you understand what Jesus does in between the first fig tree scene and the second fig tree scene. The part in the middle with the temple, you understand that because of the fig tree. One is a commentary on the other. Okay, that's a Markan sandwich. Okay, and the Gospel of Mark has like 80 of them. Like, they're all over the thing. You can actually just Google it and find a list. There's 80 of these things in there, and they're
he's like the chiastic king,
beautifully
he really
constructed.
is, for sure.
And to understand what he's saying, you have to look at the surrounding material or the material contained within it, and you're like, now it's amazing literature. This guy was not a simple fisherman. No, this dude, and it's obvious by his understanding of geography, he never went to Israel. When you're in this one city and you're going to travel to the southeast to go to another city, and you somehow do it by way of a city that's like 50 miles to the north, the one thing you can really fault Mark on is that he did not have an accurate map of that place. He gets the geography wrong all the time. Now, there are other things he gets wrong, like how they conduct their trial of Jesus and stuff like that. But I don't think he got it wrong because he didn't know how it was done. He got it wrong because he made it wrong, because he wasn't talking about this trial that occurred. He was talking about older stories. He was redoing the Atonement Festival. That's why Jesus comes out, and you've got Jesus, and then you've got Barabbas. In some manuscripts, his name is Jesus Barabbas, meaning Jesus, Son of the Father, being put on trial next to Jesus, Son of the Father.
Yeah,
it's the scapegoat ritual. You have two identical goats. One is meant to be Yahweh. The other goes to Azazel. One, the innocent one, gets sacrificed and his blood scattered everywhere to gather up all the sins of the world, while the other leaves the city to go and be killed out in the desert. Which there are versions of the story in which Barabbas left Jerusalem and was instantly killed. It's the scapegoat ritual. That's why the story doesn't make sense. Like, oh my God, how could they even do all that?
The names themselves are almost a dead giveaway. For anybody that just missed that, what Jason was saying is that the bar plus whatever the name is, that means son of. Bar in Hebrew is son of, and then whatever the name is. So bar Abba, Abbas, that's father. So son of the Father, Jesus, son of the Father. So that's what Jason. So I didn't want anyone to miss that, because that's such a great point.
Yeah. So you basically have two people with the exact same name being put on trial. Yeah. One is evil, guilty of like murder and treason, and the other is innocent. One is Azazel, one is Yahweh, and the innocent one dies for the sins of the world. It's the atonement sacrifice. And this is an ancient ritual. This goes back. This may not have even been a Jewish thing. This may have been like an old Canaanite ritual.
So here's an interesting thought. And I don't know what you would do with this, but does that make Herod or Caiaphas, whichever it is in the story, sort of playing the role of the high priest there?
Kind of, yeah. You've got some really weird things going on, because like you start off with the the Jewish officials condemning him, but then they have to go and have this trial with the Romans. Well, why? Why would you need that? Because if the Jewish officials had condemned him to death, all they'd have to do was take him out back and hit him with rocks until he was dead. They didn't need any Roman okay to enforce their own laws. They stoned people for things like blasphemy and stuff all the time.
Sure.
But you've got, and it's one of those things. I don't want to get sidetracked because it'll take a while to get into, but it looks like they were trying to take a multitude of stories and kind of roll them into one version in which he was stoned to death, and another version in which he was crucified. And so he's tried by the Romans, but he's also tried by the high priest, and he's found guilty of two different crimes. And they kind of, it looks like Mark kind of put both of them together.
Mm-hmm. Because
and
he's playing on the ritual, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we actually have one of these other versions preserved in the Babylonian Talmud, in which Jesus and his disciples are arrested, and they're charged with basically doing unauthorized magic, and they have this big public trial. It's very public. It's not held in secret and private. It's announced for like 40 days so that witnesses can come forward on their behalf. And then ultimately, he's found guilty, and then he and his 5 disciples are executed by stoning, and then their bodies are hung up outside of the temple. They're hung up on display, which is actually another form of crucifixion. We think of crucifixion as being hung up on a cross and you slowly die. But in the ancient world, it wasn't that specific. You could be impaled. You could have your corpse just hung up on display. You could be hung up for a while and then let down. It could be a manner of execution. It basically just meant like your body was hung up. That's all it meant. And so in this other version, Jesus was stoned to death, and his 5 disciples were alongside him, and then their bodies were crucified. But this happened like a century earlier. This was under Alexander Jannaeus around the year 70 BCE. And so there were Christians who followed a completely different Jesus. And the Jews in Babylon wrote about him. Their Jesus died a century earlier, and he had 5 disciples and a public trial, and he was stoned and then crucified. And so it's unfortunately like that little Christianity went away. We don't have it anymore. It's gone. We don't think we have any of their text, any of their letters or gospels or anything. None of their stuff survived. We only have a reference to them. And it wasn't even by them. It was by an outside group. So like there wasn't even one Christianity. It looked like each group, each version of Christianity just put their Jesus into a different point in history. And whether or not there ever even was a Jesus, like people are actually debating that. Like,
well, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like people like, okay, you say there's this guy, but the only evidence we have is not evidence at all. It's just the claim. It's like the other Jesus that was, stoned to death.
Yeah, the entire evidence, all the evidence comes from the Bible itself, which also requires
that's not evidence. That's the claim.
Yeah,
exactly. Like I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole.
No, it's fine. Like, I don't care one way or the other. I mean, I'm apathetic towards it. It doesn't matter. But
unfortunately, like what we're left with is just the mythology that's been built up around it. Whether or not there was a guy who was mythologized or there was a myth that was historicized,
right.
The end result is that we have these myths that don't add up to history. They're written allegorically. And when you read some of these other writings, like the letter to the Hebrews, the Epistle of James, Revelation, the writings of Paul, um, it looks very strange. Like if you were to assume that this started with a guy, you have some difficulty explaining some of these other writings. Like, how do you get the writings of Paul, which says that Jesus first appeared after his resurrection? Like, no one saw him until after he resurrected. Then he appeared to Peter, and then James, and then like 500 other people. Or I think, according to the letter to the Hebrews, he didn't get the name Jesus until after he ascended into heaven. That's weird. Or in Revelation, it talks about how Jesus will come to earth. Like, it lays it all out. Jesus will come. There'll be this whole big, great thing. It doesn't say he's coming back. And Paul confirms this. Jesus will come, and then he'll go away for a while, and then he'll come again. In Paul's time, 50, 60 AD, the arrival of Jesus, the first time he shows up on earth, is a thing that has not yet happened. He looks forward to it happening. That's weird. Like, if this was a thing, if the whole gospel thing, which was written, long after Paul's death, if this was based on some kind of historical event, how is it the earliest Christians thought about Jesus as a figure who first appeared to people in visions after his resurrection and wouldn't come to earth until sometime after Paul's death? That's really weird. And that's the thing, like, doesn't matter if there was a guy or not. The stories are what we have, and they're really weird, and they're interesting.
Well, we just
and that's what gets me going back to him. Like,
we just need to trust Paul because he said he had a vision and saw Jesus.
Well, yeah. And what's funny is
just trust him.
When they talk about other people like James and Peter and John, Paul says he has the same authority as them because they also found Jesus through vision and scripture. They all encountered Jesus the same way, in their dreams, in visions,
well, some of them
in hallucinations,
saw him or whatever,
and finding him in the Old Testament. So it's like that seems to be the standard. Some of them
claim that they walked with him and talked with him and saw him or whatever, but like they all say he died. The only one who saw him in a vision was Paul, and he didn't actually encounter him. He just saw him in a vision. These other guys claim to have seen him, but the only accounts we have of that are written by these gospel writers that clearly weren't actually right. So they're just telling a story. But this guy Paul just makes a statement, blanket statement. Hey, this guy saw him and this guy saw him and 500 people saw him, and you just got to trust me.
Yeah.
And that's literally the whole, that's like the whole account. Everything comes from Paul. Like, Paul said it, so we all just got to believe it because he said 500 people saw it. I'd like to talk to these 500 people. Like, what?
Yeah. And at the end, when you look at some of these archaeological discoveries, like Tel Arad, and it's the only surviving temple to Yahweh in Israel. All the others have been destroyed. And they look at the smoke residue in it, and it's like cannabis and frankincense. And they're like, and it's insane amounts. Like, the amount that they were, like, the sheer volume of smoke that they were putting out in their temple practices, it was tremendous. And then when you go back and you read these other things, like how, like, Ezekiel, he fasts for like a month,
right?
And then he goes into this field
not only
eating
that, but
a bunch of flowers,
side, like naked, and then the other side, naked.
You got that whole weird thing.
With dung, eating dung and shit. Like, what?
You really don't want to eat Ezekiel bread. I know it tastes good, but when you read how they make it, I'm so glad they don't follow the recipe. But no, he has this whole thing. He's like, he's over there. he fasts for this tremendous amount of time, and then he goes into this field and he eats a bunch of flowers. That's the only thing he's had for like weeks. And he suddenly starts to see God. And you, or when they talk about how in, I think like Isaiah 6, in the beginning of Jeremiah, in Exodus, anytime they talk about Yahweh showing up, you know that Yahweh is present because of this huge cloud of smoke. The smoke billowing out of the Holy of Holies indicates that Yahweh is there. And the priest would like go in, and sometimes they'd have to like drag him out and stuff. And you realize that they're taking copious amounts of cannabis and they're burning it inside of this thing in these braziers inside of the Holy of Holies. They're filling it with smoke. And these priests, they're eating these flowers as part of this ritual to commune with their deity. And you realize that opium grows natively there. And you have to wonder, like, do we now know how they had these visions of their God?
Bro,
I mean, we know
right now,
they were mixing up cannabis and frankincense and other things to fill the Holy of Holies with plumes of smoke. We know this, okay? This has been confirmed. They've tested the smoke residue at Telerad. Like, Google it, Telarad. Google that, you'll find it. So we know they were doing that. But there's also indications, little hints here and there, that self-flagellation may have been a thing. They may have just been beating themselves until they were in such agony they started to hallucinate. They talk about that there's little things where they talk, like in the letters of Paul, how some of these people they're like speaking in tongues and like dancing crazily. And you read that, but then you go back and you read things in Isaiah, where he talks about how there are these sacred cakes that they would eat made of this special bread that was stored in the little dark, dank storage rooms inside the temple. And when you ate it, you were then filled with the presence of Yahweh. But now the new temple, there's something wrong with the recipe and it no longer has the presence and you don't feel God within you. And you say, okay, was there something in the bread in the first temple that did something weird to people?
Bro, you're killing me right now. Like, so I mean,
and when you read about, you read about ergot poisoning. It's a mold that grows on wheat, and if it gets into your bread, it causes people to babble incoherently and dance, sometimes until they die. And you're like, did they have this in the first temple? And it was in their bread, and that was the presence of Yahweh? And then after it was destroyed and the new temple was rebuilt, the mold was gone. It was a whole new building. Mm-hmm. The new grain stored in there couldn't have the mold growing on it because it was gone.
Right.
And that's
a whole new meaning. It's like why Paul would need like a scribe to write his passages. Why even at that one place, like, I'm writing in large letters. Maybe he wasn't blind. Maybe he was just like,
Yeah.
And he's like sitting there like, I'm Paul, bound servant of Jesus Christ. I'm writing to you.
Yeah. There are all these, different Greek writings where they talk about how they took this certain type of fungus and they mixed it into their wine, and they would use it in these mystery cult practices. They would drink this wine that had this weird fungus in it, and it did all kind of weird, trippy stuff. Google like the Eleusinian mysteries. You'll find some really weird stuff. And different people who study these things, multiple independent scholars have come to the same conclusion. They were using this thing called ergot. It was this fungus that grew all over the area, and they were mixing it in with their wine. And people have actually, there was this one researcher who went and did this. He got some wine and he got some ergot, and he started trying to recreate these recipes and dosing himself, and started having like these really trippy visions. And we're talking about a culture that was heavily influenced by Greek culture. Like, they were constantly trading and communicating with the Greeks. They were ruled by the Greeks for a while. Alexander took them over. You know, was this part of Yahwistic practice? Were they dosing themselves the same way the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Greeks and all of their neighbors were? You read
and
about
and maybe and maybe not by accident. Maybe they were just doing shit and
yeah.
hallucinating.
Yeah, well, one of the big inspirations for Moses was the prophet Zarathustra, and in one of the like foundational stories of Zoroastrianism, they talk about how Zarathustra he got this magical concoction called soma, and he drank this stuff and like falls down on the ground, and he meets the god Ahura Mazda, and you have to wonder like did Soma get incorporated like so many other Persian ideas? Did that get incorporated into temple practices in Judaism? You read the word that is actually used for the altar of the Holocaust in the Jerusalem temple. It's a Persian word. It's the fire altar that the Persians use for worship of Ahura Mazda. It's not a Jewish word. In our oldest descriptions surviving on the island of Elephantine in Egypt, where they talk about this, it's a Persian word used for this. Their practices have been influenced by cultures that used psychotropic drugs as a central part of temple worship going back 2,500 years. Is that what we're reading about when Ezekiel goes and he lays down in the field and he just eats a bunch of flowers while on an empty stomach and then has these visions? When Paul has these visions and he flies up into heaven, how did he get this vision? And we look at this today and make fun of it. Oh, you're just having a bad trip. This was an approved and common part of ritual throughout the ancient world. The Native Americans would build a tent. They'd build a small fire and cover it with wet pine boughs, and the smoke would cause them to nearly asphyxiate, and they would have spirit visions. There's no psychotropic action involved in pine smoke. It's not doing anything to you. But oxygen deprivation can cause visions. It can cause hallucinations. But if you're also full of frankincense and opium and cannabis, and maybe you whipped yourself bloody while on an empty stomach, and you swallowed some wine with ergot, what are you going to see? When you read these things, it just makes you wonder. And I'm not saying, when Paul talks about the people dancing and speaking in tongues and stuff, these people have ergot poisoning. That's not what I'm saying. There's no evidence of that, okay? I am asking the question, is this a possibility? These things seem to have been used in neighboring cultures and have similar effects. Is that what they're talking about?
Well, look, I mean, if they're borrowing their mythologies from these surrounding nations, do you think there's a chance that they're also intrigued by these nations' practices? What's making these nations so wonderful? Why are they so happy? I'd like to learn. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no reason to think that if they're borrowing mythologies, they're not also borrowing some of their practices.
Right.
So, I mean, I think
we know that they were
valid. I think it's valid.
I mean, in Exodus, the second time Moses comes down with a copy of the Ten Commandments, one of them is to tell them to stop boiling a baby goat in its mother's milk.
Right.
And that was like one of the 10 Commandments in,
not one of the 10 Commandments, but one of the 613 Commandments.
Well, it was one of the 10 Commandments in his second version of the 10 Commandments. That's completely different from the first version.
Oh, okay. One in Deuteronomy?
Yeah. No, it's later in that because he goes into Exodus, he gets 10 Commandments, then he smashes them, then he goes back up and he comes down with the copy again, and it says it's exactly what was written the first time, and then it recites what's on there, and they're completely different. And one of them is you're not supposed to boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Well, this was an old Canaanite
You know, it's
practice,
about now,
you
yeah.
know? They were doing these things. They were taking practices from other cultures. Um, you know, because and it wasn't just because these other cultures were often more prosperous and happier and successful, but just because everyone borrowed from everyone else. They had their stories, they had their practices, they got their names. You know, Moses is Egyptian. Abraham, it literally says he was born in the city of Ur of the Chaldees. The Chaldeans, that was a group of Babylonians.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
which coincidentally that when it says that, it gives us a time frame for the birth of Abraham. Because it says he was born in the city of Ur of the Chaldees. That'd be like saying you were born in Washington D.C. under Barack Obama. That gives you a time frame. We know when the Chaldeans were in the city of Ur, and that started a few decades before the Babylonian conquest. So it's telling us that Abraham was born around the time Jerusalem got destroyed. Um, so
Wow.
about 1100 years after he supposedly existed is when the Bible says he was born. Um, so yeah, they borrowed everything. You know, if you tried to make a graph, a pie chart of how much of Judaism was purely Jewish, you wouldn't have much. I mean, between the Canaanite, Egyptian, Greek, and Babylonian and Persian influence, that's going to be most of it. There's not much remaining after that. And I think any that is remaining is just the stuff that we haven't been able to confirm came from elsewhere.
Dude, bro, I can't. I'm actually shocked you pulled this off. Like, you took us from Genesis to Jesus and even beyond in the last hour. And actually, had to cut you off half an hour ago, you still would have accomplished your goal because you had already taken us there. So, bro, I'm impressed, man. You did an exceptional job. Um, we
Thank
got
you.
to end at some point tonight, unfortunately, because I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Maybe we can do this again and just keep going, Jason, because this, like,
Yeah.
you are absolutely blowing my mind. You're so intelligent, dude. You got so much knowledge. I think the world continues to need to hear from you, and I'm so glad you're here. Um, just to let everybody know, this is a chance for you to throw some questions into the chat for Jason. I mean, or for me, that's fine. But I'm guessing it's more for Jason because he's the guest here tonight and he's the one who has all the knowledge of this stuff. So this is your chance. Throw some questions down. I'm going to make a few comments here at the end, some announcements, and then I'm going to return to the comments and just ask any questions that you guys have for Jason. I just want to make a show this one here, Jason. This is really cool from Harmonic Atheist Tim. You know Tim Mills, freaking awesome guy. The Bearded Dragons, two legends, great work as usual. I love that comment. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, it's one legend and then a tag along. But we are two bearded dragons. That is true. So thank you, Tim. It's great to have you here tonight.
Yeah.
Let's see. Some
Tim's
fun.
awesome.
Yeah,
Anyone
dude,
who's not subscribed to the Harmonic Atheist,
for
go
real.
go to his channel now. Just don't even question. Don't even watch a video yet. Just go there, hit subscribe, and start watching tomorrow. Just
So fucking lootly. You're absolutely right, Jason. No question about it. Join Harmonic Atheist, no doubt. And while you're at it, if you don't mind, while you're here, just subscribe to me as well. I would really appreciate it.
yeah,
The Unraveler, I would love it because it would help me continue to grow my channel and be able to continue to do shows as this. So if you would subscribe to me, that would really help me out a lot. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I think most of the guests here today are from your channel anyway, Jason. But if not, Jason, why don't you tell everybody who's watching where to find you? I have the link in the info to your YouTube channel. And on your YouTube channel, you have all your links. So that's
yes.
why I got into that one spot. But why don't you tell them anything else you want to tell them?
So the main thing is the audio format podcast. Take out your phone, get any podcast app. If you have an iPhone, it's already on there. It just says podcast. If you've got an Android, there's, I don't know, a million of them. There's like a Google Podcast, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. Though I think Spotify might be gone now. One of them's gone now. Anyway, look for any podcast app. Doesn't matter which one. Pick one. Good Pods, iHeartRadio, whatever. And do a search for Dragons in Genesis. Look for the big orange logo that has a silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. That's me. You can't miss it. I'm everywhere. If there's a podcast app, I'm on it. And if your favorite podcast app does not have Dragons in Genesis, send me a message on Facebook, Twitter, email, whatever. I'll work to get my show on that app. Anywhere else you can find me, just go to dragonsingenesis.com. There's links to everything on there, or search Dragons in Genesis on YouTube. I'm easy to find. I try to just keep it nice and simple. I'm on Facebook, Dragons in Genesis. It's there. And I try to post links to every show that I publish. So once a month, usually the last week of each month, I drop the new episode. The entirety of the Old Testament has been covered, but as I said earlier, I'm going back to redo all the Genesis episodes. We just did the one covering the story of Isaac, which has some really cool stuff, including the possibility that Ishmael may have actually been the original legitimate son of Abraham, and that's where the 12 tribes originally came from. But then the Jacob story took it over. So we cover that possibility as well. And then we'll be continuing on and wrapping up the story of Genesis in the next few months. And then with episode 100, we'll be diving into the Gospel of Mark. It'll be a 4-part series going deep into that, about 40 to 50 minutes per episode, each one only covering 4 chapters. So really taking my time to go through that. And we're covering, essentially showing where every single line of text in the Gospel of Mark may have originated from. Over a dozen different sources looks like they were used by the author of Mark, and we're going through the whole thing. Where does this story come from? And so like the letters of Paul, the books of the Old Testament, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, some of the Egyptian writings, the book of Enoch. All of these things look like they were used by the author of Mark to create his gospel. We break down where those things came from. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing. If you want to know what the Bible says, where the stories came from, how they fit into the context, without someone preaching at you or telling you that you need to believe a certain thing, that's what the show's there for.
Awesome, Jason. It's really great. Appreciate you giving all that info. Sadly, it's like as soon as I said, "Hey, it's time to end," you became a Chinese movie martial arts film again. I don't know what's going on.
I've been
I'm
practicing my
hoping.
kung fu, so
Yeah, it's great, and everything you're saying is coming through, but your lips aren't matching again. So hopefully everybody's okay with that. I don't know if it's me. It might be my end, but I don't know.
I don't know.
But I apologize. But we are ending, so bear with us if that's an issue on your end. Just a couple things from me real quick. Again, subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. For those of you who are part of my show and love to see these kinds of shows regularly, there's options to support down below in the info. But most importantly, I would encourage you to come over and join Deconversion Nation on Facebook. The link is also in the info, but you can obviously find us right on Facebook, Deconversion Nation. This is a really cool Facebook group because it isn't just for those who have deconverted. It is for both the deconverted and those who are just in the questioning phase of deconversion. And maybe not even deconversion. Maybe you're a full-blown Christian, but you're at a stage where you're just scratching your head and you're saying, why are so many people leaving Christianity? That's what this group's about. It gives you a chance to come in and have a platform where you're safe to ask questions. And this group is protected to the best that I can. We're not allowed to tell the world who's in that group. It's a private group, but it gives you a chance to come in and say, hey, I'm a Christian. I don't understand why you guys are leaving. Here's some questions I have. It's not a debate group, although there's some fun rules about that if you want to have a debate. But just go ahead and check out the rules. And if you're interested in being a part of a group that allows for dialogue and questions for somebody who's just struggling to understand what's going on here and questioning their faith and trying to deconvert and or all the way deconverted and wanting to help people deconvert. It's the whole spectrum. I want to invite you to be a part of that group. So come on, check it out. I'd love to have you. Right now, I'm doing a show on Sunday nights with a friend of mine named Rick Welch, who is also in that group, but he is a Christian and I am an atheist. And we're having an online debate, but more like a discussion because we're friends. And it's been really fun. So if you want to be a part of that and see what's going on with that process and how I go about helping people to deconvert, I encourage you to be a part of that. So that gave you all some chances to throw some questions into the chat. Jason, I'm going to throw whatever questions we have here. One from
Okay.
really on in the show, because I thought this was a really kind of a humorous question. So I'm going to throw it up here. What's up with Straight Out of Egypt t-shirt, Jason, from John Geyer?
Oh yeah. So first, what's up, John? He's been a fan of the show for like 100 years, which really tells you how old that guy is. Um, no, a few years ago, I just some people asked if I had any merch, and I'm like, I don't know. Who wants a picture of a dragon attacking Jerusalem on their shirt? Whatever. So I was like, what am I gonna do? And so I was like, you know what? Straight out of Egypt, and I threw Moses up there. I did a few others. A few years ago, Did you see that video where the lady, she's in her dad's kitchen and she asks him about God's name, and he goes, "Yeah, well, God's name is Howard." And she's like, "Please tell me this again." And he goes, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And he's like dead serious. Um, I have some, not this one, this is Thundercats, but I have some cups, some glasses that have that quote, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And I tracked down, it took me about a week to follow the trail back, but I found the lady who recorded that video. And I said, "Can I make some glasses with your father's quote on there?" And she says, "Absolutely." And so I made the thing, I sent her a link, and she bought one of the glasses and gave it to her dad.
Nice.
So yeah, I've got that. I've got a bunch of other like misheard prayer things on there, a handful of other things. But yeah, so if you want to represent, straight out Egypt, there you go.
Instead of Straight Out of Compton, I love it. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
So where do you get your merch?
I honestly don't remember. I haven't touched
No,
that
I mean, like, where
store
can
in
somebody
so
buy your
long.
merch? I meant.
Um, I, I have one of those little online stores set up,
You don't know where
and
the okay.
I don't remember. Zazzle, maybe.
Oh,
I,
that's where I have mine. Mine's on
okay.
Zazzle too.
I think that's where it is, but I don't remember. I really need to get on there and make some more stuff
That's
and
all good,
promote
man.
it
I
more.
have
But
mine on Zazzle, but my merch is so funny, but nobody would get it unless they read my book.
yeah,
Which, by the way, if you're listening, I encourage you to go to Amazon and get How to Kill God the Easy Way. You can get the link in the info below as well. It's a really awesome book. I totally encourage you to buy it. Like I said, I do have a second edition coming out, but it's going to be a while because it's really under
yeah.
some big scrutiny. We're trying to make it great, but it's a really fun book. It's really awesome. But in there's this whole thing about Goerings, and then I have a whole merch line called Legend of Goering. But you'll only get that if you read
Yeah.
the book. But yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I have another one. Bible study.
Okay.
So yeah, interesting Pornhub logo, but yeah, if you want a Bible study shirt,
That is the
uh,
Pornhub logo.
yeah, a listener joked about that,
Great, dude.
and I was like, actually, that
Dude,
would
I
be
swear Tim would love this. I hope Tim's watching, man. That's fucking
yeah.
great.
So a listener joked about that, and I was like, you know what? That's actually kind of funny. And so I grabbed my computer on my lunch break. I banged that out. I put it on there,
Oh my god, dude.
and anytime that's in the background, people are like, "Where can I get that shirt?" And I'm like, "Here's the link."
That's great, dude.
Um, yeah. So that's a great. If I ever start going to conventions, that's the shirt I'm going to be wearing.
That's pretty great. All right, let's move on. Somebody, Jag0937EB said somebody needs 12-step program. I'm only throwing this up there because way early in the show we were talking about our addiction to, our like overwhelming drive to do these shows, and it made me crack up
Yeah,
when I saw
yeah.
it earlier, but it wasn't the proper time to show it. But I just wanted to show it now.
Yeah, it's like a
Um,
Podcasters Anonymous.
yeah,
Hi, I'm Jason. I have a
podcasters are
problem.
not. That's pretty funny. All right, I am scrolling, folks. So if you had a question, I hope I see it in here as I'm going down. Otherwise, this show's about to come to an abrupt ending. Let's see here. Okay, one question from Jag. Why do you have the picture behind you?
Oh, um, this is the Ancient of Days from William Blake. If you've ever seen the movie Red Dragon, it's kind of like the prequel to the Hannibal Lecter movies. They have the thing, the woman in white and the red dragon or whatever, and it's this really famous watercolor painting. That's who it's by, and he has like this whole weird, like complex mythology and stuff that's inspired uh, by some of the more some of the lesser known like Jewish scriptures, like the Book of Enoch and things like that. And I just really thought that particular picture was really cool, and I was sort of building this little recording space at a time when I was really deep studying the books of Enoch, and so that particular piece I thought just fit really well. So yeah, that's the story behind it. It's called The Ancient of Days. It's a watercolor. Look it up. It's really awesome. Um, so yeah, it's. I just thought it was really cool, and it fit with the show, with what I do.
Right on. Two last comments. They aren't questions, but I thought very appropriate comments to end the show with from Tim Mills again, harmonic atheist. He says, Jason is amazing. So grateful for his work.
Thank you, Tim.
Bravo. And I agree. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you being part of this. And finally, from Kyle _ Rad, Jason with a bunch of hearts. That's, I mean, what else could you say, man? That's a great way to end the show. Jason! All right, my man. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It was so much fun. And I hope we do this again sometime. I just really thoroughly enjoyed learning so much from you. And obviously, everybody else did as well. What a great night. My friend, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And everybody else as well. Stay sharp and live free.